Let's talk about it.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaming and everything in its orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim. Let's get into this. Today we're joined by a special guest. You know them, you love them. It's ReformedTwink.
Yay! Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, good. How are you today?
I am pretty good, on vacation. So just seeing some old friends.
Nice. Where are you vacationing? Or is that
in tropical Rochester, New York.
As a non-American, that means nothing to me. That could genuinely be tropical. I would have no clue.
Yeah, it's not.
Not tropical. Fair and reasonable.
That's for its winters.
Oh, it's known for its winters?
Yeah. I used to live there for 7 years in college and this job I had after college. So it's a city where I've experienced a lot of stress, but also a city where I've made a lot of friends. So it's nice to go back there.
You should try visiting Cleveland in January.
Oh, yeah. The Midwest. I can't even imagine what living through a Midwest winter.
It's hell on earth. It's a frozen hellscape.
That's a very, very good way to put it, I think.
Again, as a non-American, I'll just nod my head and go, oh.
Trust me, it's just not fun. It's just not fun.
Fair.
Do you get, how harsh are, winters in the UK? Don't you guys have a relatively mild climate?
I mean, I think so. I've only been here for 3 years, which you think would be enough to tell what seasons are like, but global warming, it's kind of like luck of the draw. I still don't quite know what they all get on about with summer. In terms of Australia, winter never dips below 9 degrees Celsius, which if I take my handy dandy iPhone temp conversion, bear with listeners, 9 degrees Celsius equals 48 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay, that's how I felt.
But that's barbecuing weather in Cleveland. That's people will be out in shorts and flip-flops in 48-degree weather.
That is the 5th season of the year, generally speaking. That is a very wet and rainy and humid winter. So, that's my experience. As a pasty-skinned ginger, just no weather in Australia really suits me. Funny that, as a descendant of colonizers, we're not built for, equatorial seasons. It's not really for us, is it? So, that's just what that's like. So, Timbo, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about a topic that I think gets kind of swept under the rug a lot. We're actually talking about health and the aspects of being healthy while being a gainer, or things that you have to be very well aware of as you're putting on weight. It's not something that people talk about often enough, and unfortunately there are a lot of things that plague the gainer community. So I think that this is an important episode.
I mean, realistically, there's just not enough conversation. I think a lot of us really do that thing where we say, oh yeah, I know I'm being healthy. I had an avocado once 3 years ago. That's a healthy fat. And they kind of leave it at that. But I think a lot of us have low-key acknowledged to each other a hesitancy to speak with healthcare professionals when we're not feeling the best, because there tends to be a reported instance of fat phobia and misdiagnoses when visiting healthcare professionals. I think it just feeds a lot into that kind of not putting gainers in the best health position. So hopefully with some chats today, we can maybe work out some better processes and at least get the ball rolling on the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with all that said, ReformedTwink, you are a biochemist by training. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
But you don't practice it at the moment?
Not at the moment, no. just work in higher education. But I would say that one of the best things about a biochemical education is that it gives you a lot of knowledge so that you can make critical decisions about your health, and that you can assess and contextualize a lot of health information, that comes from doctors or that is swirling around online. Since like nutrition, health, the human body, it's all determined by these biochemical processes that are going on. We're all just, a bunch of sacks of chemicals. And once we understand how those sacks work, then, we can take steps to optimize our health.
Seems
I
perfect.
mean, we're basically a biological machine. So, once you understand the process of how the machine works.
Exactly. Yes.
Just a big old walking petri dish.
In a lot of ways, yes.
Disgusting.
Yeah, exactly. What's the joke? Don't shine one of those like police blue scanners over the bed sheets because it looks like a.
Oh God.
Petri dishes.
I mean, you could shine one of those in like the human intestine and find all sorts of interesting horrors waiting for you.
Oh goodness!
And see, and it's funny, Stannon, that you had that reaction, because like that is sort of the typical reaction of someone who because I'm a nurse, so I've seen plenty of things, and I know what goes on inside the body, and so I'm very accustomed to it. And whenever, I think this is the reason why a lot of gainers don't like talking about health, because sometimes unsavory or gross things can come up, but it's something that you have to be aware of it so that you can potentially avoid it.
Yeah, exactly. Like digestive issues. That's a common problem among gainers that most people simply don't want to talk about or acknowledge. But these issues that people are hesitant to talk about can really reduce the quality and length of a person's life. And so I think when it comes to healthy gaining, the real secret is to just anticipate health problems before they arise and start taking steps, because it's easier to prevent than it is to treat a lot of these problems.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. There's no real secret then to make sure you have banana chips with every meal, or put psyllium husks to make sure you've got enough fiber. It's truly just being sensible, looking at what evidence and information is out there, and making a plan to maybe see your doctor more regularly than you might have done in the past, just to touch base on things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, honestly, and one of the things that I like to do in trying to get big and trying to stay healthy is that I don't avoid eating a lot of unhealthy foods, just because they tend to be the most calorically dense and are therefore really necessary for gaining weight. But one of the things that one of my first pieces of advice is to eat a lot of healthy food in addition to the unhealthy stuff. So a lot of unhealthier foods, stuff from fast food places, stuff that you would find in the freezer section. The problem with them isn't just that they have a lot of calories. The problem with them is also that they are deficient in a lot of the key nutrients, like micronutrients, that are critical for keeping us healthy. Most people in the world, and especially in Western countries, tend to be deficient in a wide range of the minerals and vitamins that we need for optimal health. And so a lot of the strategy that I've just sort of been feeling out as I go along is to just make sure that if I'm going to be eating the junk, then I'm going to be supplying my body with all of the stuff that it needs in addition to the junk, so that at least as I'm going along, micronutrient deficiencies don't become a huge problem.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, let's be honest, health is a subject that a lot of gainers ignore. I think because, and maybe this is a critique of typical gainer culture, a lot of us have that mentality of wanting to gain as fast as possible, as the focus, rather than focusing on gaining with longevity or with health in mind. I mean, just putting it out there, what would you say are some of the most common health issues that will crop up for someone who's prioritizing?
Oh, there are many. Gaining, I think one of my things about gaining is that if you're going to make the decision to gain, you need to make an informed decision. So basically, you need all of the information that surrounds the health problems that can come with putting on weight before you actually make a commitment to doing it, because otherwise you won't really understand what you're getting into specifically. But gaining weight can, predispose you to heart disease. It can predispose you to cancer. It can predispose you to diabetes. It can cause joint problems. It can lead to inflammation, which can actually contribute to mental illnesses like depression. It can interfere with sleep, which in turn can, just causes a cascade that can lead to a whole bunch of other health problems. And so a lot of my strategy to stay healthy has been individually anticipating each of these health issues before they arise, and I try to take steps to reduce them. And I think that's a strategy. Why it's really beneficial for gainers is that actually, like, if you take steps to stay healthy while you're gaining, you'll be able to actually get to a bigger size in the long run, because your body can actually sustain a larger weight without you feeling like complete crap all the time. So you'll feel better. You will certainly probably live longer, and I think it will just be a more enjoyable experience overall, because gaining is great. It's a pretty critical part of my personality and my sexuality, but I don't feel that it should have to compromise all of the other areas in my life in order for me to enjoy that. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think it's much like any other aspect. Like if you have a job that's very demanding of you, sure, you want to commit to your job, work your job, do it excellently. But if your job gets to the point where you don't have a healthy work-life balance, then the job isn't doing good for you. And you need to reconsider and adjust how you approach it, speak with your managers if need be. But with gaining, of course, it all comes down to us and our own personal responsibility. No one's looking after our gaining journey except ourselves. I mean, Tim, you're also a gainer who, as you say, is a nurse and has worked in the medical profession for a long time. How have you best approached maintaining your health while gaining?
I kind of go in spurts with this, because there are times when I'm not focusing on it at all, and I'm getting, how we say that there are so many gainers who focus on trying to get fat as fast as possible. I fell into that trap too, mostly because I would go onto social media platforms like Grommr or Instagram, and I would see gainers that I was following just seemingly blowing up overnight. Within a couple of months, they were doubling their weight, and I was like, well, why can't I do that? And so, then I would focus on, I got to keep on my calorie intake. It's got to stay up. It's got to be at 3,000 calories a day, or this is never going to work out. And and then I'd get frustrated when I wouldn't see progress. And I'd be like, all right, fuck it. I'm just going to maintain. Whatever. I don't care anymore. And then I would go try to, again, focus on my health. And yeah, it's a weird, delicate balance that you have to walk in order to, accomplish both things. I do still exercise a little bit. I still do a light amount of cardio. And I always said to myself, because of my profession, I need to stay under a certain amount of weight, or should my weight gain begin to interfere with my job, I need to stop, because I don't Reformed was saying, you can develop joint problems. And if my knees are hurting too much, my ankles are hurting too much, my back is hurting too much, and a code gets called, if I have to respond to a code blue, I do not want to be late. I don't want my weight gain to affect me being able to save someone's life.
I think that also kind of comes down to, people of more extreme weights, who people who might need a carer, people who might need any other kind of personal assistance to kind of function and go throughout their day. It's worth considering and addressing the fact that you need people to help. Maybe ask the question, are you really comfortable with having someone change your pooey nappies? Are you really comfortable with someone emptying your bedpan and injecting into your stomach and having to lift up folds that you can no longer reach because you're bedbound in order to sponge clean you and treat fungal infections? You've really got to be frank and honest. And I think, even mentioning something as simple as changing your pooey nappies, maybe we need to be more frank within the community talking about these things. It's a thing that happens, and shying away from that conversation probably doesn't help new gainers to assess their wants and needs, and probably doesn't help people who actually have that lived experience feel comfortable to share it and feel like they can connect with people on that kind of a level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when people completely ignore, the health aspect of gaining, it, allows our community to sort of be painted as a straw man by people outside who really aren't looking to understand us. They're really just looking to, criticize us and make us into, some sort of internet freak show. Like I know that for a while when I would type in the term gainer in Google, like it would only talk about these really extreme cases, often where someone, like ended up dying because of that, like their participation in, gainer activities or like, gainer adjacent kinks. And so when we completely gloss over any topic of like health, it, I think, can often scare away people who are interested in the community, but aren't quite sure if they want to dip their toe in the water. And it can really give give everyone this mistaken impression that all gainers are just complete hedonists with no regard for anything else in their life. You know what I mean?
No, that makes perfect sense. I mean, I think it's as good a time as any to address it. There is a subgroup in the gaining community, and I think, they go by many names, but I think death fetusts is the common one. They're a group of people who effectively want to gain unhealthily, intentionally, I think with a very clear goal. How would you suggest that these individuals look after themselves more effectively, considering the style of gaining that they're approaching?
Oh, that's a difficult question. My personal stance on death feeding, and I apologize if this comes across as derogatory or negative to any members of our community. I don't want to kink shame anyone. I don't know that death feedism is really compatible with ideas on healthy gaining. One is about, intentionally becoming unhealthy, and the other is about, as being as healthy as possible and harm reduction when you're actually gaining weight. And so when someone engages in, I don't really want to create a false dichotomy or anything, but when someone talks, it really has to be one or the other, because it, depending on what you're comfortable with and depending on what you do, it can be really hard to be healthy while also being unhealthy. It's just, they're kind of mutually incompatible ideas.
You're absolutely right. It is kind of the antithesis of the whole point. And in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have included that question. It's just, it does sometimes come up because, like, I know a few gainers personally that are intentionally trashing their bodies. Like, that is part of
the appeal. I know, I think it comes down to the fact that everyone seems to connect with this kink in their own ways. And so for me, this kink is kind of a validation of like this animalistic, masculine part of me. It just feels it feels very sexually empowering. It makes me feel, strong. It makes me feel manly, et cetera, et cetera. But for some people, they connect with gaining in a way like through submission and humiliation, stuff like that. And so depending on how, for me, I want to basically be as big as possible while still retaining my health and mobility. Because I, really enjoy the thought of being large, but that isn't as appealing to me if I can't live a dignified existence, and participate in a lot of the other activities that go along with life. But some people, they connect with it in this different way, and that, I guess, loss of agency, that submission, that sort of humiliation and the unhealthiness, that is what connects with their sexuality, and that's how they express their interest in gaining. And so it comes when I talk about like death fetism with disapproval, I don't want to say that their preferences are completely invalid. I just think that it's easy to make these decisions now, before, like, years before you have to deal with any of the consequences. And obviously, like, I'm sure a lot of those people enjoy a lot of short-term pleasure. You can't discount the value of that. However, thinking long-term, I think if a lot of people follow that road to where it inevitably leads, they will find that the overall enjoyment that they were able to get out of life was greatly diminished by death feeding. So that's my general stance on it. I don't want to shame anyone who's into it. It's just not for me in particular. And I think gaining in general should always be a choice and always something that you question. I think that's true whether you're a death fetist or someone like me who tries to stay relatively healthy while I gain. So like I said, I don't want to kink shame anyone, but I would urge them to try to think about the decision in the long term.
I mean, to me, it doesn't come across as kink shame. I think, like you say, there is that sort of quintessential parting of the ways when it's like an unhealthy style of gaining. How do you be healthy when you're unhealthy? How do you stay dry when you're wet? How do you get a suntan at nighttime? Like, it's very, how do you do the impossible? I think there's the question that I thought of which is, some people who are into death fetism, is it just a fantasy? Do you just get off to it? Because I'll be frank, I do. I get aroused by the idea, I look at the pornography, and I jerk off. And then I come, and then I'm like, oh, that was great. I don't want to look at that right now. Like, I've done my bit, and now I'm prepared to go about my day as if it never, you know what I mean? And that's how I know that it's not something I'm ever going to genuinely pursue, because I understand that aspect of myself. And I think for some people, maybe it is just a fantasy. And it is important to understand that aspect of yourself. What are you genuinely working towards? Your lifestyle in terms of health is something that you're looking at over a period of years, days, weeks, months, years, not just this one feeding session that you're having like right now. Like, sure, this one feeding session right now, guzzling down all that ice cream and slurping up all that pizza is probably not going to do you in, but it's worth considering the long run. I think, what is it? There's like not to be that fag, but there's like a line in Hamilton where he says, what is a legacy? A legacy is planting a garden that you don't get to see. And I think that also rings true for the things that we do now to sustain our health in the long run. Making those healthy choices now, you don't see the immediate results. You're never going to, because that's not what they do. That's not how they work. The point is that by the time you reach an age where maybe some people are struggling, you're not struggling.
Yeah. And with certain things, there can be a more immediate payoff in terms of health benefits. One of the things that I think all gainers should really consider doing is implementing some sort of strength training routine, especially with regards to their core and their legs, because those are obviously really important areas to keep strong and to sort of reinforce if your body is going to be able to handle all the extra weight. So I put a big emphasis in the exercises that I do. I put a big emphasis on core strength and on leg strength. And as a result, like when I was skinny, I was not really a healthy skinny. I actually had back pain when I was like, I think it was at my skinniest. I was like 155 pounds, but I was rail thin. And so I would like be standing all day and I would have back pain. But now that I'm actually like, I'm nearing 290 at this point, I actually have less back and joint pain than I ever have in my entire life, just because I've specifically set out to exercise and reinforce those areas with muscle. And so A lot of it is long-term health stuff that you won't really see the benefit of right away, but there are some short-term things that will probably improve your quality of life in the present as well as in the future.
One thing that I always push with everyone, that's into gaining, especially the bigger you get, take extra care of your feet, because your feet are the furthest away from your heart. And, God forbid you should get diagnosed with something like type 2 diabetes, a small cut on your foot can become a very big problem. And so to make sure that your feet are well groomed, moisturized, even if you're too big to clip your own toenails anymore, schedule yourself a pedicure every 2 weeks or find a podiatrist, but take care of your feet, because I have seen some stuff.
I mean, we all hear stories. We all see the Facebook chains that get sent around. A friend of a friend who had a doctor who had a nurse saw this mangled foot in the ER once, and it looks like they've got 12 toes with mushrooms sprouting and growths and things that need to be hacked off. And I don't know, just it's those things where you never think to yourself, God, I wonder where that came from. But considering the level of extreme that some of us are looking to transform our bodies, it may come from food, diet, and a lack of exercise. So, like you say, it's just worth keeping an eye on. And, boil it down to a self-care day. Is there anything wrong with going to a spa and having your bits looked at? I don't think so. Just like Homer Simpson, get a delightful small person to walk on your back and, giggle as they get sucked into the quicksand effect. Reform, does that ever happen to you? Have you ever had a small person be sucked into your fat folds? Does that happen to you yet?
No, but that's my greatest aspiration.
Absolutely. You want to be laying there on the bed. We ask you the question. We'll do a follow-up interview in 10 years, and you roll over, and there's just one little hand
It's just a mummified corpse in my fat folds.
You're I just keep it around as a memento. The amount of weight you've put on just actually crushes them into a pure diamond. Love that.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Actual weight. At that point, it's not about the health. It's just, what can I do to better service the diamond industry? Oh goodness.
To set up a competing interest to the diamond industry.
Absolutely. It's the follow-up industry that gainers never thought to look at. We conquered health and fitness, and now jewelry and luxury wear.
I love this.
I mean, I often find that you've got to be able to joke about these things. Who was I having a conversation with recently? I made a joke because they were like, "Oh God, it's so hot today and I feel so sweaty." I'm like, "Yeah, you do, you fatty." And they were like, "That's not funny. I really struggle with sweat." And I'm like, "Babe, you're 320 pounds. I'm not gonna lie to you. I don't think this is a unique lived experience to be a sweatier person at 120 pounds. I think you just need to learn to own it,
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of my general philosophy, even for stuff outside of health, and gaining, I want to fully acknowledge all of the bad, along with all the stuff that I like while I'm making the decision. I never want to be deluding myself into thinking that all of these downsides, which you guys have pointed out, don't exist. And so I take steps to try to mitigate those downsides, so that I can maximize the enjoyment without getting all of those negative consequences down the line, or hopefully preventing at least some of them. There's no obviously 100% preventative measures when it comes to health, but
doing your best.
Yeah.
One bloated foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
I mean, here's a question for you, because obviously you don't practice at the moment, but studied. It's the supposed goal of healthcare professionals and scientists to have everyone reach their optimal level of health and maintain that. Being honest, do you think it's possible to have an open and honest conversation with your healthcare advisor about your intentions to gain weight?
So I actually have at one point in the past, and my not the doctor that I'm currently seeing, but so I just prefaced it by saying this is gonna be weird, but here is what I want to do. given that, do you think it's possible for me to take and actually, like, he was actually very nonchalant about it. He's like, that is far from the weirdest thing that I've heard. And so in that instance, I actually found him to be kind of supportive. Not necessarily that he approved of it, but that he accepted me anyway, and that he was interested in harm reduction. But I don't know that that will be the case with most medical professionals that you encounter. And so it's certainly a topic that you have to, broach with some care, just because some medical professionals aren't going to entertain that idea at all. And it can really cause a breakdown in like the doctor-patient relationship. But I think it really... Oh, sorry, you were saying?
Oh, no, I was going to say, what's odd about that specifically is like, okay, so, I'm a nurse and I've been around other, I work with other nurses, been around other doctors. There's quite a few of us nurses that are overweight and some that are morbidly obese. And I even briefly dated a doctor who was a gainer. He was a cardiac doctor and he was a gainer. And he was a smoker. So it was like,
oh my goodness.
I kind of was like, I never actually sat down to have the conversation with him about like, isn't this a little hypocritical? But it was like there are people who, like, as much as us healthcare people are supposed to be like the lead by example, we're really not. We're just as complicated and fucked up as everybody else, and like we all have our own wants and desires too. And like, I might be telling a person who has specific illnesses due to their weight, being like, well, you can't do that. You got, but then I'm doing it myself. So it's a weird space to inhabit.
I mean, you all put the hip in hypocrisy. I mean, here's a question about y'all, because you guys are like somewhat medically trained. Do y'all have like a fascination with popping pimples? Because
I do not.
Because, okay, this must be a thing back home then, because everyone I knew that was a fucking nurse or whoever, like, it's that whole thing about like squeezing a pimple, like this weird satisfaction, right? Like I had one on my shoulder once back at like the job when I worked in scheduling healthcare, and there were like the nurses in the thing, and like I was just minding my damn business, and one of the nurses happened to walk past. She was like, "Oh, James, you got a little pimple happening back there." I was like, "Oh, do I?" I couldn't see it, and they were like, "No, just let me have a look at it." And then she called over like all the other nurses, and they were like, "Yeah, that looks." They were like rummaging in their kits, and I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ, like stop this. But like literally, I hadn't even noticed. They'd like anesthetized the spot, and then like with a little scalpel just went and like got it all like swabbed out and did all that. And then there was a band-aid on me, and I didn't know what was happening, but like they said it's like a nurse thing. They're like, yeah, all nurses love like a popped pimple, and I'm like, ugh. Like,
no, I'd rather change a colostomy bag. I do not like pimple popping.
Reformed, what about you? Pimple pop or change the
I enjoy popping my own pimples. It's it's the tactile satisfaction in doing it. I don't really get pimples anymore that much though, so alas, it's not really something I think.
Well, I'm very jealous
that I'm able to.
Because I'm 38 and I still get pimples.
I have like one or two on my back, but they're not very fun to pop.
No, I can imagine.
It's disappointing.
You got to do the Simpsons thing where you take like the greasy chicken wing and just like rub it somewhere where you can access it for later. Like
sort of cultivate my own little farm of them.
Exactly.
It's kind of funny that like I would find that particular thing so gross, and yet I have had to deal with like really gnarly wounds before. Like I've had to change dressings on some pretty intense wounds, and that does not give me pause. Like I don't get grossed out by that, but the thought of like popping someone else's zit just like sends me into shivers.
I'm the exact opposite. I'm very squeamish about blood. But when it comes to like zit popping, once I had a friend who had this condition called hidradenitis suppurativa, which is basically where you get this painful cystic acne, and it can actually be quite life-threatening. And so he was going through treatment for that. And it was getting a lot better, but he just had like a few holdout zits on his face. And so finally one day I'm like, can I pop those? And he's like, fine. Went through, did that, and then cleaned them out and bandaged them. It was it's not something I'm proud of, but it happened.
So we've talked a little bit about like some typical health bits and pieces that gainers might run into. Like, what do I want to say here? What would you say are some of the biggest concerns that gainers should be keeping an eye out for in terms of their health? And what are some simple ways that maybe they can go about trying to prevent them?
So I would say heart disease is a big problem. Type 2 diabetes is a big problem. Problems with sleep, that's another issue. And then you need to just be generally proactive about managing your cancer risk, because when you eat a very high sugar diet, it raises your blood glucose. And there's this principle in cancer biology that's been well established for quite a long time called the Warburg effect. It states that basically cancer cells are very, very, very hungry for glucose because they use it not just for energy, but to also make all of the other things that they need in order to proliferate. So when you eat a really high sugar diet and you're not, managing your blood sugar at all, it can actually encourage cancers to, it can produce inflammation that can cause cancer in the first place, and it can encourage other existing cancers to metastasize, basically to spread out more quickly. And so if you look at those, areas that I mentioned, cancer risk, sleep, heart disease, and diabetes, there's a lot of specific steps that you can take in each one. Like for cancer risk, I am really anal about like applying sunscreen before I go out and expose myself to the sun, just because skin cancer is among the most common causes of like types of cancers in the world. I always try to eat lots of antioxidant packed vegetables. So like just eating broccoli, there's been so much research that's shown that eating broccoli 3 to 4 times a week is associated with a like very, very large, like 30 to 40%. Actually, I would need to look at the exact numbers before I cite any specifics, but very large reductions in cancer risk. So that's something that you can definitely do, like sun protection, protecting yourself like by eating antioxidant packed foods, maybe just buying an air filter for your house so that you can reduce your risk of lung cancer from environmental pollution. Things like that can really go a long way in stopping cancer before it starts. Another thing with type 2 diabetes, obviously, you can exercise. Exercise is because it sort of causes your cells to be more sensitive to insulin. Like one of the drivings behind type 2 diabetes is the fact that insulin is a hormone that causes your cells to absorb glucose. And in type 2 diabetic people, a lot of times those cells stop listening to insulin when it comes a knocking to let in the glucose. But when you exercise, you actually cause your cells to be more hungry for glucose. So cells that ordinarily would be resistant to insulin suddenly are a lot more receptive to it and are a lot more willing to uptake glucose, just because you are using up their energy stores and they need to replace it. So exercise is a really great way, especially if you, there's a cardio component that's really great. And then there's also the functional component. But that is really great at controlling your blood sugar. You can also eat, like if you're eating a lot of junk, but you keep a high fiber diet, that can really moderate how quickly your body actually absorbs glucose. Like it could cause it to diffuse more slowly, so you don't get huge spikes in blood sugar. And you get a more steady absorption of it that doesn't cause massive problems with insulin. That's why like fruits have sugar in them, but that's part of why they're so well tolerated in the body, is because they're packed with good things like fiber that help to moderate how quickly it diffuses into the blood or is absorbed into the blood. With regard to heart disease, there are a few things you can do. Like obviously, exercise is one of them. I think what I like to do I like to monitor my blood pressure and my blood sugar at home. And then I also try to do a cholesterol test every time that I go to the doctor. And so I just want to generally see that those things are being kept in check so that I can reduce my risk of heart disease. And it also, I like to track my blood pressure on a daily basis. And that has also really made me aware of how certain foods or behaviors might, raise or lower my blood pressure. And so that's been really good for, working to avoid those types of issues. And what was the last thing that I said? I am losing my train of thought here.
That's okay. I was basically going to echo everything that you've just been saying. Like everything you said is on point. Diabetes is something that does stalk the gainer community because type 2 is acquired, whereas type 1 is what you're born with. And diabetes interferes with your circulation. It really wreaks havoc on the body. The sleep problems that you mentioned, that a lot of gainers develop sleep apnea due to the weight gain, and sleep apnea can be very dangerous. You can actually suffocate to death in your sleep. Like I had sleep apnea even when I was skinny. They can't figure out what the source of my apnea is. So even when I was only 125 pounds, I had it. So I've had a CPAP since before.
Right?
Huh?
Like when you're skinny and you have apnea, it's usually because your nasal passageways are too thin or too narrow.
They couldn't figure it out. I asked, is it a deviated septum? They're like, no, your septum's okay. So the explanation that they gave me, which is one of those bullshit medical answers that I'm accustomed to giving sometimes, is they're like, well, we think that your body just relaxes too much and it blocks off the back of my throat, my soft palate. They think that that's what's blocking the airway. And they were like, there's two options for that. Either we can correct it with surgery or you can get a CPAP. And I'm like, which is cheaper? They're like, the CPAP. I'm like, okay.
I mean, a lot of what you're saying really resonates with me in terms of not to be that, but it almost seems just a lot of the obvious. Do you get any exercise? No. Maybe try and get some exercise. Is there any fruit and veg in your diet? No. Maybe have a look at that. Are you checking in with maybe not going to the doctor, but just buying a blood pressure monitor? Are you at least trying to keep an eye on your shit so that you can manage it yourself if you're feeling so inclined? It's yeah.
My biggest problem personally is salt. I salt everything, and if it's not salt, then I'm putting soy sauce on it, which is again just nothing but sodium. Salt is an acquired taste. We are not born craving salty things. And that is specifically an acquired taste from your diet. And I friggin' love salt. I will put it all over every damn thing I eat. And I have to cut that out because I already have genetically predisposed high blood pressure. I'm on medication for it. And yet here I am dumping all this, like Matt, my boyfriend, whenever I make popcorn, he's like, let me have it before you put the salt all over it. I'm like,
to be fair, I'm very
I actually do have a piece of practical information with regard to that. The reason why it causes high blood pressure is because it actually causes an increase in blood volume. I'm sure you know your nurse. It causes an increase in blood volume. And the extra volume of your blood places additional strain on your circulatory system. But one way that I think is often overlooked, and instead of just reducing sodium, a thing that you can sort of do is add more potassium to your diet. So potassium allows your kidneys to excrete more sodium. And so by eating a lot of potassium, you're actually lowering the amount of sodium in your blood. And so I've noticed that very potassium-rich foods can like I try to incorporate them a lot, and that does seem to have a noticeable effect on my blood pressure.
And to a degree, yes. When I bring that up with other healthcare professionals, they're like, you also have to be very careful about too much potassium, because if your potassium level is too high, you can have a heart attack. If it's too low, you can have a heart attack. That's why they often don't like you to substitute that, like, because they make a salt substitute. Like you can buy it at a grocery store, and it's basically just that. It's granulated potassium. But then they say, well, okay, but don't use too much, because if you do,
one of my response to that would be just that, like, the recommended daily amount of potassium is like, I think 5,000 or 6,000 milligrams, and most people don't come anywhere near that.
And that's true.
When I try to get up closer to that limit, without exceeding it, one of the things that I drink for that is actually coconut water. That seems to help a lot because it has so much potassium. When I get up to that without like going crazy, it's because I actually think it's very hard to meet the recommended daily amount. So most people, I would say, are probably not at risk for exceeding it too much.
Yeah, no, I understand.
I do want to ask, and this is probably going to be one of like the sort of like clincher questions I think that people might be interested in. Do you think it's ever going to be possible for the health and fitness industry to kind of live and let live with fat people and gainers? Or do you reckon we're probably always going to be fighting the system?
There is a big movement among dietitians to advocate for something called intuitive eating.
Right.
And so intuitive eating isn't a weight loss diet. What it is basically a mind-body framework. And the basic premise is that rather than following a restrictive diet, like restrictive dieting is harmful and often laden with fat phobia. And so rather than following a restrictive diet, you basically just learn to, you don't restrict any foods, but you basically just learn to listen to your body's natural hunger cues. Because like a lot of the symptoms of craving and whatnot are actually caused by the fact that we often restrict a lot of foods. Like I've noticed that now that I no longer restrain myself from eating ice cream, because I'm gaining, I often don't really seek it out that much anymore.
Okay.
And another part of that's become I think a really positive force for change in the healthcare industry is this idea called health at every size.
Right.
Basically, don't pathologize fat. Like fat is correlated with a lot of health problems, but that doesn't often it's due to a set of behaviors that fat people can actually change, but that some of them might not necessarily be caused by being fat itself. You know what I mean?
Sense.
So it's more like an approach to change your lifestyle or your bad habits, as opposed to going on some kind of crash diet or
with the sole intention of losing weight. I think it's the medical community has often labored under the misconception that overweight the Venn diagram between overweight and unhealthy is a circle. That's how a lot of them have thought in the past, but that's not necessarily true. And so and it's actually really harmful to a lot of patients, because then they simply don't feel comfortable accessing medical care. And so there's been a lot of acknowledgement of that within the medical communities and among dietitians. There are actually a few dietitians that I follow on YouTube who are really big into intuitive eating and health at every size and fat acceptance. And so there are certain wings in those community, in the medical community, that are very reasonable and willing to acknowledge the humanity of fat people instead of just reducing us down to something that they presume is a disease.
Is there anyone that you would recommend that listeners could go and follow?
Abby Sharp on YouTube. That's ABBEY, and then just Sharp. She did this great video about intuitive eating. that really explained the framework and got me interested in it. Honestly, like just gave me a lot of optimism about the future of healthcare in general, just because it was such a well articulated explanation of what is honestly, I think, a good guiding philosophy for most people. So while I don't do intuitive eating now, because obviously I'm gaining, I'm intentionally ignoring my fullness cues to gain weight. I think I would never go back to restrictive dieting again for that reason. I think I would just switch to intuitive eating.
That makes a lot of sense. We do have a listener question, which reads, oh, let me pull that up. Listener question: how often should gainers go and see a doctor?
Oh, that's a good question. I think certainly at least once a year. It really depends on how, like, if you're noticing any issues come up. I guess if you start noticing issues like with high blood pressure, high blood sugar, a lot of times you won't know about those things until you go to a doctor. So at least once a year. But then if you, like, in order to help manage those conditions, it's often very useful to see your doctor more frequently so that they can have a greater hand in like forming your strategy for improving your health. So I go to the doctor like 3 or 4 times a year. I also have struggled a lot with mental illness, and which is actually something I forgot to bring up earlier in the video. I struggled a lot with mental illness, and I like to see a psychiatrist like 3 or 4 times a year for that as well. So I think it's always good to have a healthy dialogue going with your like medical professionals. And so, while I don't encourage being a hypochondriac, I think seeing or at least being able to communicate with them on a regular basis is a good idea if you plan to gain.
I would agree. I would say, try to stick to at least twice a year checkup if you are within relative health. I mean, again, everyone's a bit different. And like Reformed was saying, if you notice that you're starting to have a problem with these things, and like speaking from experience, when I started having problems with my blood pressure, I noticed that I was having like dizzy spells. Like I would be just standing there at the nurse's station, minding my own business. All of a sudden, this wave of dizziness would hit me, and I would feel like my pulse was going up, and I would feel jittery. And so, after a couple of weeks, I finally went to my doctor, and they're like, well, we're going to run a blood pressure panel on you. They took it like 5 times to get an average, and they found like it was ridiculously high. So they're like, yeah, we need to put you on medication for this. And so say like, if you think that you might be experiencing problems with your blood sugar, good symptoms to look out for is like when your blood sugar is high, you're going to feel very hot. You're going to feel dry because it's a dry heat. So keep this in mind: hot and dry, blood sugar high. And it's, if you're feeling, and if you're feeling any kind of way, like we said, don't become a hypochondriac, because we all know what happens when people go and visit Dr. Google. But, if you listen to your body, and if you know there's something wrong, definitely go get it checked out and get blood levels drawn. Ask your doctor as you reach certain ages what they think is appropriate to start testing you for. Just always stay on top of it.
Makes a lot of sense. And that brings us to the end of our episode this week. Reformed, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate having you here.
Thank you for having me. I was so flattered that you guys asked.
Oh, well, where can people find you?
I am on Instagram and on Grommr if you guys are interested. I like to post a lot of content there, and I don't really want to bring this up just because it seems inappropriate, but if you are interested, I do have an OnlyFans as well, but not
feel free to shamelessly plug yourself. It's fine. We've had people do it before.
We're not a gaming conglomerate that has rules about what you can and cannot say that seem completely subjective until it actually affects you and then gets all weird about things.
Yeah.
So, Grommr and Instagram at ReformedTwink. Is that your OnlyFans as well, at ReformedTwink?
Yep. Yes, if it must be mentioned.
It absolutely must be mentioned. We shall not have it any other way. But that brings us to the end of our episode this week. Remember to like and subscribe, rate, review, give us 5 stars. As always, you can find me on Grommr and Instagram at stannnum, and Twitter and YouTube at stannnumg.
And you can find me on Grommr as Orpheus. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter and YouTube as Thicc Mouse. And you can find more of what we've talked about today on Instagram and Patreon at Thicc Radio.
And we're also now on Twitter and TikTok.
Yes.
At Thicc Radio. So until next time, bye, Fads.
Bye.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Anchor app podcast produced by Stan and Thicc Mouse.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Body by Cream.